and such as financing the prizes for the Young Lawyers Contest, which was finally fought out in the Court of Justice on Wednesday. And so there's a first prize and a second prize, and they are not ungenerous. So it's not a symbolic prize, it's a proper prize. We have a number of the, is it all of the winning team or of the two teams? Participants in the room. So if you would be kind enough to stand up for a moment. And may I invite one of you to come here and say a few words. Oh, two of you.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, first of all. And I would like to say thank you to ERA for this amazing opportunity. I would like to say that I think I can speak for my colleague too, saying that we are very thankful to ERA for this extraordinary experience, I think. And I say extraordinary in the real meaning of the name, extraordinary, so out of the ordinary, because ordinary, I'm used to deal with national judges in my own languages, with my national lawyers on my same country. So this has been an extraordinary experience because I had to deal with lawyers from different countries, from all over Europe, with different perspective, in fact, of law in any type of meaning it could be intended. So I am really thankful to ERA. I want to say thank you to Ms. Hartmann too, who directed all the step since the semi-final, the final, all the step of this amazing contest. Thank you to Ms. Brass, who helped us and supported us for all the issues that we could have. So thank you again for this extraordinary experience. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically my colleague just said all I wanted to say. But I might just add that it was indeed an amazing experience. It was an opportunity to meet indeed lawyers from all over Europe, from different legal systems, different ways of reasoning as well. So it was challenging, but really I would say the climax of it all was when we pleaded before the General Court on Wednesday. So it was a one-of-a-kind experience, and thank you to all the organizers for such an amazing experience.
So maybe this is the opportunity for me to invite you all to become friends of ERA, right? You can all pass by. All those who are not yet wearing a Friends of ERA button. We are also happy to have facilitated the presence of our closing speaker, who has the difficult task of holding our attention on a Friday evening at the end of 2 days packed with interesting speakers, but I'm convinced she will do it with verve. Christine Landfried is Professor Emerita of Political Science at the University of Hamburg and has had a very international career, both on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side of the Atlantic, at eminent universities such as Heidelberg, Harvard, Yale, Sciences Po in Paris, Berkeley. Have I forgotten any? Probably, but her research interests include the political role of constitutional courts, the European Union, and the relation between art and politics. And her talk today fits in this context perfectly. Please, over to you.
So, thank you so much for this kind introduction. And also thanks to ERA for inviting. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to thank Jean-Philippe Rajat. Where is he sitting? He's just outside. And Wolfgang Heusel for the invitation, which was a surprise to me because I've never been at ERA here. I've never been in Trier for the first time. And I must say, it was really an honor. And the debates since yesterday, they have been a real pleasure. So now the last talk, the topic you wanted to talk me about was a federal future for the European Union. We have learned, I think, in the last 2 days that sovereignty has a new meaning. It's not anymore what we learned from Baudin, but it's a shared sovereignty, and we have seen sovereignty in different fields, in digital fields, in the budgetary field. And so we can see it's much more differentiated by now. Now, my question, what I want to bring in here is, well, how, if we have so more and more sovereignty also for a supranational organization, which we in former times could only imagine for a state, so how can we have a legitimacy for so much sovereignty? And the question here is the title, could a federal state make this up? Could this be adequate for a European Union? Would this be the solution? So I think understanding sovereignty in the sense of strong, as doing something together, as empowering the European Union, this is in the sense also like the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has said it in his speech, which we all know, in the Sorbonne of 2017. And he also said, we need a European Union which is sovereign, united, and democratic. So the question is, what about these European democracies? I want to make first 2 normative premises. I think democratic legitimacy cannot just be legitimacy by output, by good laws, by effective policies. Some of my colleagues are doing that. They say, well, the European Union is not very democratic by elections, but they are very democratic, so they get their legitimacy because they are doing good politics. So I don't think this is enough, just to have legitimacy by output. You also need legitimacy by input. And then the other thing is also, you can't just have legitimacy by the member states. You also need that the European Union, when it has so much power, that it has democratic legitimacy in its own right. So these 2 things said, I think one can see that so far the European Union has not democratic structures which are adequate for the power, for the sovereignty it has in the meantime. So we observe that on the one hand, we have growing competences, all the time, more and more competences. We see now already with the last program of Next Generation EU already that we have debts, we are liable, all these 27 member states. So we have more and more competences on the side of the European Union. But what we have not more democratic legitimacy. So we have already low democratic legitimacy, and it's not growing, but more or less it's getting on the same status quo or going back. I want to explain this gap between more competences and not enough democracy by a mechanism of European governance. So I sent before so we see the way how I want to proceed. I want first, to show the mechanisms of European governance, which I think is a reason to explain for this situation, for this gap. Then I want to discuss shortly what are the criteria for judging reforms. Then, what would be the reforms for a democratic and sovereign European Union? And then the last point will be a roadmap. How can we sort of realize this? I think that in the end, I will not shy away from answering really also the question if it should be a federal state. So I will not play the scholar who says, well, this cannot be answered now. So I will make a proposal, a concrete proposal, and you will see it in the end, that my position will be that we really, in the European Union, to have this democratic legitimacy, we need a new start. And we must take much more serious the citizens. And so just the conference on the future of Europe, where the citizens have drafted proposals, we should take this seriously. This should be a start of a new convention, a new start for the European Union. I think that we need treaty changes, but I don't think that this needs a federal state. So this will be then, I will show in the end, go a little bit to the roadmap. So to my first point, what is the mechanism of European governance, which I think explains that, we have low democratic legitimacy? We are confronted with so many crises in the last decades. And in all these crises, of course, not the parliament is the first one to speak, but the executive. This is always the case. You must act quickly, and so it's the Commission. It's the European Council. It's the national executives. And then they make ad hoc measures to solve the crisis. And it's always said, this is ad hoc. This is temporary. After the crisis, this will be over. But if you look at these crises and at the crisis management, this is not the case. Once the crisis is over, these measures are going on. And you can start with the first example with a euro crisis. And this started then in 2011 with these, you all know it much better as lawyers than I do, with the six-pack, with these 5 regulations and 1 directive. To sum it up, it gave much more power to the European Commission than it had before in economic policies. Because the decisive point was, it was the Commission who could interpret the criteria from the European Council, what the nation states had to do. And then they would say, these are the criteria, and the national parliaments had to deliver what they plan in their household before they passed the budget. So it was really before, as a national parliament, which is your most important right to have the household right, then you had to send it to the Commission, and the Commission would say, well, this is okay, you can pass this budget or not. So this is just one detail to see that, this was not really something which was debated in public, which any citizen who is not an expert of European politics would know, that European governance has changed in that moment, and not only changed for the period of the crisis. So it was, one could say, a new distribution of power in the European Union, going much more to the executives. The Parliament had not, the European Parliament, it was, watching what is going on. It was not really decisive. The European Parliament could initiate a dialogue in his commissions and have somebody come from the European Council, talk with them. But this dialogue well, all these things are not unimportant. I don't want to say this, but in the end, it's not enough democratic legitimacy to have a real new distribution of power in the European Union. The next, the same happened, I think, or is happening at the moment with the Next Generation EU program. Again, of course, with the COVID crisis, you could not wait for all the parliaments to decide something, so you really had to be active. And it was very much criticized when, in the beginning, the European Union was not really acting quick enough. You all remember that it was said, oh, why don't we have the vaccines, and why not all the same, and why, you know, why every nation state is starting again to make its own job, and so on. So it was criticized. So I think this program was very important. And it's the first time, you remember very much, that it was always very much debated. Germany never wanted that we have debts. We are all liable for it. Now, suddenly this worked. Suddenly they said it's possible. So we have this huge sum of 750 billion euros, which I learned today in the working group has become even more in the meantime. So it's a real big thing. And it's made for modernization projects, for digitalization, for the green, for the environment. So this all makes sense. So if you want to put it with a short term, you would say it's like, practically, it's like the beginning of a fiscal union. But of course, legally, which is very important, the rules and all this, what is written, I see that it's important, it's only temporary. It's exceptional. It's just for this program. It will be ended at a certain stage. So in what is said so far and what is written down, what they have agreed upon, all the member states, is that here in this point, this is just for Next Generation EU program. But again, we discussed it this morning. Even if one can say, well, it's so clear that this is just exceptional, I doubt it from the experience, because Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said already, when we have the recovery program we will have for the Ukraine, we should make it according to the model of Next Generation EU program. So, of course, now you can say, well, she means in the spirit of, and she doesn't mean the details, of course. But, you know, I think such a big step, which I think is a good step, I would be very much for a fiscal union in the European Union, but this step needs democratic legitimacy. It needs a public debate. It needs the citizens to know. If you talk to somebody about this, the people don't know that governance is changing with such a program. So I think the described mechanisms of European governance, they are not, or this mechanism, there are more, but I now concentrate here on this one, they are not enhancing, at least, democracy. But a supranational organization as the European Union, and I don't think we have to talk about sui generis, it's a supranational organization, and the name European Union, I think, is a very good name so far. It needs democratic legitimacy. This means that we need reforms to reform such mechanisms. We have to decide, do we want a fiscal union? We should not just decide it by ad hoc measures and just go on and don't discuss it. So my next point then is, what are the criteria for reforms? The criteria should first be a reflection, I think, a discussion, and making conscious also a broader public that the European Union has developed from a single market to a political order. That we have what we discussed for 2 days here, that there is sovereignty in so many areas, that this is not just a single market, important as the single market, of course, remains. This is the first, I think, that we need a reflection. And then we need, I think, a consideration, of course, of European values. This was just in the last debate. It was also mentioned how important this is. And I've tried to make a graph. This graph I have reduced with the values on a social model. I think this will become in the next years especially important, that we have more equality and more solidarity, besides, you know, having rule of law, which is important, besides having freedom, besides having these values as well. I think what I just have picked two, but it means it should be, you know, a reconsideration of values of justice and solidarity. I've put this in the center, but you, of course, must imagine the other values, of course, to reconsider and to discuss it. Then we must think, what are reforms who help us to reduce this gap between more and more competences and a weak legitimacy. This means then also we have to reorganize European governance with a focus, in my view, but you can criticize that, of the empowerment of the citizens. I think this is what is missing if we talk about sovereignty. Of course, as I said at the beginning, this does not mean a federal state. And then we need a regeneration of the whole European Union, not just a muddling through and going on and saying we are overloaded with crisis. And we should start with this conference on the future of Europe. And it was here the first time it was mentioned, I think, on the conference by Vera Jourova. Is she here still? No. No, but she was the first. It's also interesting that we talk so long about the European Union, and this was not mentioned before. And I think it would be important to take this momentum, which probably, if you are pessimistic, is already over, because this was finished in May. So I don't hope, but my proposal would be you should take this as a start for a new convention. And so these are the conditions, I think, if we want a democratic and sovereign European Union with federal structures, but not being a federal state. And anchored in the member states, but anchored also in the citizens. If these are the criteria for reforms, what would be concrete reforms? What would we need? So I think reforms, of course, first of all, have to be embedded in a concept of the future of the European Union. And starting from the criteria I have developed, of course, different paths are possible and are debated since a long time. You all know the white papers of the Commission, and there are many debates. So, for example, one possibility for reforms and for framing them in a concept would be a Europe of different speeds. You know, so to have a core Europe and other Europes, but not to go on together anymore. I don't think that this is a good way to have a European Union which is sovereign in the new sense we have discussed, and also democratic. I think we should try to do it together and not having these sort of differentiated islands and how do they come together. I think this is difficult. Another possibility, of course, which is discussed by colleagues, by a colleague from Florence, which I treasure very much, Adrienne Héritier. She has written a piece, what are the possible paths for the future of the European Union? And one is just going on like that, having hidden reforms, what I was describing with the Euro crisis and the Next Generation EU program, that you have hidden reforms, actually, but you don't talk about. You say it's an ad hoc measure. So she says it's very probable that this is going on. This is a path which I think will be taken, probably. Another path, of course, is the end, disintegration, which I think it's also not that we not only don't hope this, but it's not realistic because the connections are too many. So this, I think, this will not be a real path for the future. And one future then is but the question here is a federal union. And Adrienne Herdier is writing, this is very implausible. All the important actors, they are against this, or only a few of them are always in favor of a federal union. So she says the member governments, very few are in favor of a federal union. And in the European Parliament is more in favor, and the Commission, but decisive in the end will be the European Council and the member states, and here we have not enough member states who would be in favor of a federal state, which would mean in the legal sense that the European Union then has the competence to say, these are my competences, what the German word competence is. So this would be a federal state. This would also mean that we have what we just were listening to. We don't have a European government, but there would be a European government elected by the European Parliament. So this would be like a nation state, a real federal state, and like in Germany, the Länder would be the member states. So this would be the idea. So indeed, of course, I think for the time being, a federal future seems not very realistic. A federal state, of course, but on the other side, I would say we should now, like we see sovereignty in a differentiated way, we should also see federalism in a differentiated way. So we don't have just black and white. On the one side, we have a union of states, intergovernmentalism, and on the other side, we have a federal state and we have federalism. There is a big many stages in between. And if we imagine this at the moment with our imagine it, so the European Union is more, I think, to the federal side in the meantime. Not so much to the side of intergovernmentalism, but it's not yet a federal state. So what I would see as a frame for concrete reforms would be that the European Union is a supranational organization, but with much more democratic legitimacy, and that then the European Union would have strong federal elements. So you could say the European Parliament is directly elected, but it also has federal elements because you have different seats according to the size of the state you are coming from. So you must not be a federal state even that the European Parliament then elects the president of the Commission, for example, that you have transnational lists. So even a second chamber would be compatible with a supranational organization, which must not be a state, a federal state. It could also have federal elements. So I would imagine to go on in a process and have sort of a supranational organization with strong federal elements. The concrete in this frame proposals, I want to give some of the proposals here which the Conference on the Future of Europe has done. Because I think this is not so much discussed. The media didn't really very much report about it. And so I think if you ask the citizens, which here they have invested a lot of time, you have to take them seriously. And this is why I think the reforms, which actually, if as a scholar you know, and all you here working on the European Union, you know all the proposals from scholars, from practitioners, from politicians, from political parties, this is not very far away. And I had the chance to be an observer of this conference and was sitting in the panel 2 on the rule of law and democracy. And I must say, I really was surprised. Well, perhaps no, not surprised. I was impressed how really complex problems were discussed in a way by people who were not experts, who had different positions, who could make compromises, who would sit there for hours debating about formulations, about translations. So I think this was really proving that citizens, it does make sense to take them in the European Union much more. What have they proposed? What are some main things I just want to highlight? The one is what we discussed here. to have new regimes of sovereignty, where it's important, to have in digitalization a new regime, to have also autonomy in certain areas, of course, in energy at the moment, what we experience. And it would be, I think, in the sense like Arno Bradford has said it, to have autonomy which is open, which is not a closed autonomy. So it's not just autonomy in the energy market and forget about the rest of the world, but trying to combine this. Then they built new regimes in the a health union they propose. So all about the headline would be new regimes for more sovereignty of the European Union. They also were discussing budgetary, what we had this morning in the working group, a new regime. They would, a new regime in the social dimension for the European Union. They would very well see this point that we need more, again, reconsider the values of social justice in the European Union. So this was one big point. I think here we need reforms which cannot just be done by muddling through. I think to have a new regime in the budget and to have this next generation EU program making permanent, you need a debate. You need the parliaments. You need, civil society. So you need much more than just the executives to decide about that. A second thing which was very prominent in the proposals of the citizens and which I think makes a lot of sense to foster knowledge, dialogues in the citizens, dialogues between about represented people and elected representatives. And to know also much more about the European Union. You must imagine somebody who is never dealing with the European Union, how should she or he differentiate between Council and European Council? It's very difficult for somebody who is not like you working all the time with this topic. So wanting more knowledge, I thought this was a very important reform proposal. Then one of the important things, and I think this is also something which makes clear that we need a new start, they said we must address the challenges. We should not just postpone it all the time. And we had this morning in the budgetary group a colleague from Canada, I think her first name was Alicia, and she also said, this is the system which is going on, we just, you postpone the problem. And the citizens said, we must now address the challenges, and we need transparency how to do that. We must put it on the table. For example, the whole addressing on the demographic transition, which is always, put under the carpet. Then they have a headline in their proposals, effectiveness. We were just talking about, there are, of course, pro and cons, majority voting much more often. They want majority voting in foreign policy, in defense policy, so in all the sensitive areas. So I think this is very much debated, but they have found a consensus. It was always a consensus in this conference when 70 members of a panel, 70% of a panel would agree a certain proposal. So then they had the last point headline, democratization. And here they also have the usual, what is proposed, that the European Parliament must have the right of initiative, that we need transnational lists, and then that we should have such citizens' assemblies much more often. So I think taking these proposals, one cannot say that these are proposals which would not really make sense. How much time do I have left? We had said half an hour? 10 minutes. So, okay, so I come to the end. So I think having seen that we sort of could not, in my argumentation, just go on like this. We would need a new start, and the roadmap, how we go on, I think, would be a new convention. The success of the Conference of the Citizens depends on whether at least some of the proposals are implemented. So, yet, I think the conference has already one success by now, that at least the debate about a convention, a new convention, is now, we have a debate about that. Not in a broad public, but the European Parliament has decided we should have such a new convention. The Commission is also saying, well, we have sympathy for that. They are not enthusiastic about it, but they say if we need to make these proposals of the citizens real, if we need treaty changes, we are for a convention. And the European Council, the institution who in the end will decide, but not with the consensus, but with majority. They can do it with majority to institutionalize a convention. The European Council was very smart. You would not find very much in their recommendations, but in the end you would have a technical assessment how many of the proposals of the citizens would need treaty changes. So I thought this was a way of just really postponing it again. So they found, I counted it, 24 measures which would need treaty changes. So I think this overdue public debate, that at least we have this debate now, this we have thanks to the citizens which participated in this conference. I think political elites should be aware that you cannot just now say, oh, well, these are the proposals, and, some of them we will perhaps mention at some point, but don't do anything. They should take it as a momentum, really to have a new start for a European Union which has all these many sovereignties and, in a sum, a lot of power. Public power, must be democratically legitimated, and this is why I think we need now a new start, and we need a democratic way to change it with a convention. And then it's not even so important what in the end the organizational result will be. What they will say for the European Parliament, for the initiatives, there are many possibilities. But we should start a democratic process, not just going on like this, really to legitimize the growing sovereignty of the European Union. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.